Pilit ko gaya yung sa dito pilit ko kay Chika tak macam itu macam. Macam tu kau, cuma saya susah.
Hawakan mo lang naman.
Excuse me, my battery died there. Where was I? So yeah, I visited the Philippines again after 10 years, and I spent time with my grandfather for the last time. Oh yes, it was there in a remote village about 12 hours away from Manila, the capital city. I received my first traditional tattoos, and I'm quite proud of them. You can see over there, the first line represents mountains, and I kind of imagine them as volcanoes because you could see on top of the triangle there's a bit of a dark upside down triangle that kind of looks like smoke emanating from the mountains, and all over here are snakeskin, which to me symbolically was like shedding of the old me. And when a snake sheds its skin, it's symbolic of renewal, coming to the new me. These 3 dots here, I don't know if you can see it, the 3 dots, they're the signature of the tattoo artist, Apo Wang Ad, who is at the time 102 years old when she tattooed me. Yes, 102 at the time, so she must be 104 now. Lovely old woman who still seated on a squat position, climbing up and down the mountains. The area which they live in is quite mountainous. It's beautiful, and they carved rice terraces on the mountain. And yes, you see, when I say these were kind of like volcanoes, that day that I got my tattoo, it was the full moon, I remember, in January. And the moment I got this tattoo, the next day on my way home, the volcano, the closest volcano in Manila, the Taal volcano, erupted. And there's a lot of volcanoes in the Philippines, first of all. But the fact that, I got this tattoo, the volcano erupted, and I was actually on my way to my mother's hometown. It's a small town in the south of the island of Luzon called Bicol, the area. Land of the spicy food, delicious spicy food. They use a lot of coconut. And home of, Miss Universe winners. Anyway, I'm very proud of that, my ancestry. And I remember driving, not driving, but I remember being in a bus, and the bus was driving in the vicinity where the volcano is erupting, and there was this black, what looked like, I remember, because it was January at the time, it looked like snow falling from the sky, except it was black, and it was filling the roads with black snowflakes. Except, it smelled awful. It smelled like sulfur, like rotten eggs. And I remember looking at my phone and the Google Maps, and there's a red thing, red alert saying, warning, volcano eruption alert. I've seen like snow storm warning in effect, but never a volcanic eruption. So that was quite an experience. And finally went to my mother's place where I got to surf. She has a small, she has a small, like a beach house, I suppose, by the beach, and I got to study for my board exam there, and I surfed, and that's where I experienced my near-death experience while surfing. Essentially, a ripped current took me out into the middle of the sea, and because the waves were so big, none of like there's no skidoos there. Okay, there's hardly any kind of like speedboats. There are traditional boats that wouldn't be able to leave the port of the shore because there's not even a port. There's not even a dock because the waves were too strong. And so I remembered like realizing what was happening, especially when the figures became smaller and smaller and smaller. And I remember the buildings, you know, were like this teeny teensy weensy blur from the horizon. At least I could still see my mom said, you know, if you ever get cast away in the sea, make sure you could still see the shore no matter what. So I could still see the shore, so I'm fine. But some, you know, time elapsed, and I just at that point knew that I have to, first of all, not panic. That's the number one thing, is to remain calm and to just allow the current to take you out into the sea. Theoretically, I was told that it was going to bring me back. And if you were to fight against it, then you're going to tire yourself out. So I did exactly that. Of course, I was terrified, but there came a moment where felt like I was very close to death. Like death was basically a board away from, like the surfboard was the only thing that was keeping me alive. Because even though I'm a strong swimmer, the waves were so strong, the currents were so strong, I would have not been able to keep swimming. So yeah, I remember just having a conversation with the ocean, more like a negotiation. I said to Mother Ocean, look, you know, if my time is up, then by all means go for it. You may take me, but before I go, like, you know, I'd like to have some last words, if you may. Of course, I would, you know, try to negotiate my way out of that. I said that, you know, I feel like, you know, if you think this is it, then fine, but I feel that I have more things to do and to offer into this world. I have a lot of potential, and, you know, if you let me off the hook here, I promise to do my best to utilize all my skills and get, you know, God-given talents to better the world. And I knew as a kid that, you know, when I was a kid, I dreamt of becoming somebody that worked for the National Geographic. You know, one of my idols at the time, you know, was Steve Irwin and the likes, you know, people who worked with animals. I've always wanted to be a doctor for animals. My mom discouraged that. She said, you know, you should be a doctor for people. And I guess that's kind of what happened. Was I eventually went to naturopathic medical school for people, although the love of nature and animals never left me, because my father was an environmentalist, and that's actually the reason why we left the country, is that it was his job to shut down corporations who were not following environmental regulations. He too was a chemical engineer like my grandfather, and he worked for the Department of Environment of Natural Resources, DENR, of the Philippines. Anyway, that line of work became too risky because he would get a lot of bribes from these companies, multinational companies, and if he didn't accept the bribes, then they would send out threats. So anyway, that's the reason why we left. And I remember just wanting to become like my father when I was a kid. I wanted to be with nature and the animals. I watched the National Geographic when I was a kid. That's what I grew up on, the magazines. And to this day, I still have that dream. But now I realize that, in order to better our planet, it all starts with each and every individual one of us. Because if we are not taken care of, if we aren't able to take care of ourselves, then how on earth are we ever going to imagine to take care of the world at large? So anyway, going back to my ocean story, at that time I was a complete point of surrender because I knew that there was nothing I can do. I was in the mercy of Mother Ocean, and that's it. And so I just simply floated on my surfboard and waited. There's been instances. My first surfing experience was in El Salvador, and I experienced my very first time how powerful a wave, what can it do to a surfboard. And my very first time going out to sea, wave crashed onto me and my surfboard, and the surfboard snapped in half. That was my first experience. And I remember walking out of there saying that this is the most dangerous thing ever, like the most dangerous thing I've ever done, first of all, in El Salvador of all countries. And and our bus actually got robbed there. Another story. Anyway, I said, this is dangerous, like I would never do this again. Lo and behold, who's back on a surfboard? Yeah, so I remember that instant where the wave just annihilated the surfboard, and I said that could happen here too. And if I lose my board, that's it. So I just sat there, laid down there, and just floated with fear being ever so present, and what seemed like an eternity. And at that point, I was really grateful for this experience because actually that was the time where I had no more worries. Yeah, I had fear, but at the same time, I wasn't worried about my student loans. I wasn't worried about passing my exams. Like at this point, I was like, well, this is it. I was thinking about what my mother would, how hurt my mother would be if I were to go. But I said, you know what, like I'm not ready. I surrendered to the fact that, okay, if it's time, it's time. But at the same time, I said, no, I have a lot of work to do. So please give me another chance. And sure enough, I heard this roar right behind me. I saw a white wall of waves, and I said, oh my gosh, this could be it. But rather than breaking on me, the wave broke right behind me, and this white wall just literally spat me out of the ocean like Jonah's Ark. Not Joan of Arc, but Jonah and the whale. I think it's a story in the Bible where the whale swallowed Jonah and spat him out into the ocean. And that's kind of how I felt. My legs were all wobbly. I was when I got out on the beach, and I said, wow. And everybody came to me and said, are you okay? Because, we thought you were a goner. Like, none of the surfers wanted to risk their life. And I don't blame them. So, that was the moment where my life changed. Because a lot of the things that I was depressed about, a lot of the things that I was focused about, feeling victimized by my past and others, feeling helpless, all disappeared because I was this close to death, like so close, face to face. And so I knew that if I wasted my time, and that is not to say, to minimize the experience of depression, because I certainly lived through it for a very long period of my life, and it still does come and go in my life, and I've learned to develop a new relationship with it. um, but nonetheless, my focus was no longer about me. My focus was about serving the world, like I had promised Mother Ocean. And I call her Mother Ocean because she's very similar to my mother. The Pacific Ocean, where we grew up, the name is very misleading. It's like Greenland, and Iceland. It's actually not very Pacific. It can be very calm at one moment, but in an instant it could just totally switch, and it has the ability to take your life away just like that. So I walked out of there feeling alive, because I was so close to death. This close. And that wasn't the first time I was that close to death, but this is the first time where I was conscious and know that, this is it. And so I don't remember what else what happened. I remember there was an earthquake, which luckily didn't strike where I was. I experienced 3 typhoons while I was there. One of which, the typhoons, it was really ridiculous how fast the winds were. I can't even recall, but something like 80 kilometers an hour maybe. Anyway, mango trees, which are very large trees and have deep roots, were being uprooted, and one actually fell, almost crushing the house, my grandparents' house. There's something quite humbling by being in the presence of Mother Nature when she's in her rage, because you feel so small and helpless, yet at the same time you feel so grateful to be alive, and that is enough to sustain you to fight for your life. And there's something poetic about that. There were several outbreaks, about 5. There was a one that was transferred by mosquitoes, the dengue. There's one that is in pork, swine flu. There was an assortment of diseases after flooding and stuff like that. But the one that we all know was, the coronavirus. And at the time I was downplaying it. My mom was calling me, telling me to come home, and I was like, oh no, it's just another. And she's like, no, come home. So I booked my flight earlier, and at the time, as I said, the volcano was erupting, and the day that my flight was gonna leave, so I paid extra. I didn't want to, but I did. The day that I was gonna leave was the day the volcano stopped for a day, and that my flight was able to leave. That was the last time that I've been there. It's been 2 years now. My grandfather died shortly after, not because of coronavirus, but because of just a peaceful death. He just lay down and closed his eyes and went to the other side. And so I arrived in Vancouver, and I gave myself some time. I studied by the mountains. The day my exam came, I was robbed. 10 minutes before the exam start, I walked beside my car, and the glass was broken. Everything was taken, even my water bottle. That's the only thing I remember, was how thirsty I am during that exam. And for some reason, this building had no water fountains whatsoever. I had to knock in some woman's office and asked her if she had a water machine, because I saw there were bottles of, those big bottles that you put on the water machine. And she gave me this little triangular paper cup, and I was sipping through that whatever water I had, because the air was so dry, when the heater is on. And I was writing my exam. I don't know how I wrote that exam considering that I was in a new place. Not only was I jet lagged, I was confused, I was robbed. And I just remember putting those free newspapers on top of my seat so that I don't injure myself on the broken glass, and driving my car in a hotel parking lot and then going straight to my exam. And I wrote that exam, and I'm happy to say that I passed that exam. And then so, you know, I had to leave quickly because the virus was spreading. I got my car fixed and I drove through the United States. This was, mind you, in the middle of late January, early February. So there were a bunch of snowstorms along the way, but lo and behold, you know, every time I followed my intuition, I asked for divine guidance, like which should I make a right turn or a left turn, which, you know, interstate would be better for me. Lo and behold, the longer one was, you know, it's scenic, was the one that skipped the road closures. It was an incredible journey coming back home. You know, as I said, I left in the springtime. It's almost a year now since now taking my car, whose name is Thor, by the way, a little Ford Focus blue. I spent some time in Yellowstone National Park, and that was a very spiritual place for me, because I feel connected to volcanoes. You know, I strongly feel that there's a good amount of water element in me, so I'm so drawn into ocean, but also the fire. You know, I grew up in the Ring of Fire, so volcanoes speak to me, especially when it erupted on my day of rebirth. So I spent some time there, and I remember communing in the sacred place. My tour guide took me to this place, and he told me that the indigenous folks of this area believe that this is where the first humans came from. The first man and woman emerged from this what seemed to be like a bellowing cave. So it's a special place for the indigenous people there. So I sat there, and I made a prayer, and I remember asking for three things. I asked for guidance because I knew that I had just committed and promised Mother Ocean something entirely beyond my anything that I could ever had even imagined before. I asked for strength and endurance to help me carry my task, no matter how hard it gets, to the very end. And lastly, I asked for wisdom so that I can make judgment and discern what is right from wrong, so that I can make wise decisions. I feel that's been granted 2 years later, because here I am. And after that, this bellowing cave, as you know, Yellowstone, or you may not know, is sitting under a supervolcano. A supervolcano is a volcano that is extremely powerful. And so there's a lot of geysers and a lot of hot springs. This kind of like, it's like a mud volcano, I think that's what it is. So steam was coming through because it was very cold. When I turned around, so I was the only one there. The rest of the people in my tour were in the parking lot. There was this white coyote that came out right in front of me, just looking at me, staring at me. And I figured that was a sign. Okay. The memory card ran out this time. I'm gonna make some hot chocolate. for you. Speaking of coyote, wily coyote right here. My little hyena. Hi, my little hyena. Why don't you go to bed? Good boy. Ben? Come here. Where are you going? Huh? He's funny. Are you the white coyote? I don't think so. The white coyote was probably a female. And I saw that as grandmother coyote. I did see a pack of wolves in Yellowstone. That was very powerful because the woman next to me told me that she's never seen a wolf pack, and she's been coming to the park for 50 years. So although Yellowstone has numerous population of wolves, they're very difficult to see. You know, you need binoculars, like powerful ones, in order to see them because they stay away from humans. Oh, this is good. A. This is not for you. How am I gonna finish my story with all this nonsense? Would you please lie down? Okay. No, it's good. The chocolate is not good for you. You can't have any chocolate, my dear. I know. You wanna sit? You wanna sit here so we can speak to them? Okay. Right over here. Good boy. Here, sit down. Good. You want a treat? Okay. Give you a bedtime snack. Give you a toothbrush. Hey, wait a minute. Come here. Toothbrush. Brush your teeth, okay? Alright. So while he's doing that, so just so you understand why this white coyote is so important. When I told you that I was in the sweat lodge, I spoke to grandmother coyote and grandfather wolf, and I was told to go to Haida Gwaii. And the very same voice that told me to go to the Philippines. I didn't understand it back then, but now I understand that that was spirit telling me to go. It didn't make sense at the time. Why, spend my student loans? Why, go across the country for what? I'm glad I did because of the situation that's happened. I'm not able to do that now, and I'm glad I did that, and I'm glad I got to see my grandfather. And not only did I get to see my grandfather, I got to have the opportunity to heal my relationship with my father, because I realized, my grandfather, as great of a man he is, he had his flaws. He had a lot of children to take care of, 20 as I said, and he might not have been able to give attention to all of them, especially the ones that are capable, including my father. So I saw his relationship, what his relationship could have been like with my father, and I saw my relationship with my father, and I was able to forgive my father, because I saw that, his father treated him a certain way, and that explains how he is, and he didn't even need to apologize. I forgave him, and I forgave myself, most importantly, for also the harm that I caused myself and my father. And that sent me to a spiral of healing intergenerational trauma that occurred 500 years ago when Spain arrived in the Philippines. which to this day I don't agree that we should call it the Philippines, because Philippines comes from the name Philip, King Philip of Spain. Before that, those islands weren't united. They were very diverse with different groups of people. To this day, the Philippines have over 100 languages. We have more than 7,000 islands after all. So it's no surprise there that the people developed their own languages and culture. And back then, territories were different. Countries, there were kingdoms in Southeast Asia, and we come from a people, at least I, from what I know, based on my appearance, come from a group of people called the Austronesians. And not many people know about Austronesians. Even Austronesians themselves don't know. But we typically have brown skin and straight hair. We typically live in islands, islands such as what is now called Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, even all the way down to Madagascar, and most, if not all, of the Pacific Islands, from Micronesia to Polynesia, all the way to Tahiti to Hawaii. We're of the same people. We have the same culture of tattooing, as I've shown you. And they've actually been able to trace chicken DNA from Hawaii to the Philippines. Chicken was a very important food source for these people, and as well as pork, because pork tends to, wild pigs tend to thrive well in islands. Anyway, what we have in common is that we live by the sea. We love our ocean. We sailed by these canoes, outrigger canoes, and it's amazing. Like, if you think about the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, I mean, that's a lot bigger than North and South America. Like, it's humongous. It's a big expanse of water, and to think that people were able to sail across these open seas. So very proud of our culture, despite the fact that due to colonialization, a lot of our practices have been lost and forgotten. And it is in my work of healing myself first, and healing the intergenerational trauma and turning it into multi-generational strength, that I'm finding strength that actually our culture has not disappeared. It's been interwoven and evolved with the cultures that came after to influence us, and that is absolutely natural. It's part of the evolution of human society and culture. Of course, there are consequences that are long lasting due to such colonial influences, and I feel that getting stuck in the past is not very helpful. It's important to understand what had happened, but being nostalgic for something that, my father, my grandfather, and his grandfather have never, cannot recall. It's we can only have imagined, and we can now see the detrimental effects of that cultural genocide. And it's important to learn from it and to grow from it. And of course also look at some of the positives that have occurred. So now, and you could see, why it's so emotional and sentimental for me, because when I visited the island of Bali, I had imagined what it could have been like for the kingdom of Tondo as well to look similar. Indianized Hindu kingdom. But that's not how history played out, and we have to accept that. So my healing took place 500 years ago and still happening now. So healing my relationship with my father, healing my traumas, and discovering my life's purpose. And how do I go about doing that? Because my purpose is to serve Mother Nature. What better way than to serve its people so that they can learn to take care of themselves, so that they can take care of our planet. Anyhow, so that's, the transformation, or transfiguration as I call it, that had occurred in Yellowstone. Throughout this time of my travels, I was listening to podcasts, and that's how I started my own podcast when I arrived back. Which, by the way, I arrived just in time before the borders closed, and I managed to pass that exam, that course that I failed, and managed to get back to clinic. I finished school, I finished clinic, finished school. It wasn't easy. There were a lot of obstacles along the way, some of which I created myself because I'm such an avant-garde personality, I'm not often very good at following rules, especially rules that I find that make no sense. And school has a lot of rules. Nonetheless, I started this little project called the Trauma Transfiguration. Started with a podcast, and then online courses, now a YouTube channel, seeing clients, eventually retreats, and most recently I'm writing a book. So I hope to deliver that to you by the end of 2022. I can't wait. And that book will be a compendium to my course, so anyone can have access to the information that I share in the course without necessarily having to be in the course. Isn't that beautiful? It's just one way that I make my services accessible. That to me is really special. It's one of my highest values is, if this is the most important work that we're going to do with ourselves, which is the alchemical and magical transfiguration of the raw substance that created so much pain in our life and turning it into valuable treasures. Shouldn't it be available to everyone? Shouldn't its value exceed any monetary or numerical value that we may place on it? So that's how I started this radical shift to restructure our current economical and very corporate oriented society by going back to my roots. And I wanted to share some of these values that I have in my what I call a pay it forward policy. Sorry, I can't multitask sometimes. So the pay it forward policy, hang on a second. There we go. Oops. Okay. The paid forward policy essentially states that anyone who has met these three criteria should be able to access work with me, whether that's the course or the one-on-one. And I first of all encourage everyone to take the course before working with me one-on-one, because working with me one-on-one is very intense. As you can imagine, I'm an intense person, so I don't want to take someone to the deep end without teaching them how to swim first and how to sail a boat, just like my ancestors have. It happens in step by step. And although you may be somebody who feels ready, who've done your own personal work with various healers and professionals, I still highly encourage you to take the one-on-one, the Trauma Transfiguration course, TTC as I call it. it's also a way for me to get to know my students and for them to get to know me. And it's just, you know, it shows to me that you have the three qualities that I'm looking for, which is someone who is willing, right? We need somebody who's willing to go through what it takes to work on themselves. Like, it's actually the hardest piece of work you'll ever do, but it's also the most rewarding. That they're willing, that they're ready. It's important to be ready, because if you're not ready, again, it's like throwing someone in the deep end before they were in the shallow tadpole end. That they're willing, they're ready, and they're committed to the very end. Those are the three qualities. I mean, if, you know, people are not committed to my course, then how do I know they're going to be committed to the one-on-one? Because the one-on-one is limited. It's 12 sessions, and that's all I require to do this work. Anyway, here are some of the values that I have, that I've integrated and interwoven into my work. And it all stems from the values of Austronesian people, especially in the islands of the Philippines. So I'll use the Tagalog language, which is my mother tongue. Okay, there's then 10. Okay, I'll see if I can go through them. The first one is kalayaan, which means freedom. So as I said, the islands of the Philippines were so before Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism arrived to our islands, it was primarily animistic, meaning that the people had a very special and spiritual relationship with Mother Nature. So they were able to commune with spirits through both inanimate and animate objects. So rocks and trees, they had spirits. Animals, certainly. Kalayaan, you know, in Sanskrit there's a mantra called Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavatu. And that means may all beings be happy and free. Free, that's quite important. And this is why I created this energy exchange program, is because ultimately what you will get out of, you know, working, you know, transfiguring your trauma is freedom. Because without that work, we live in what may seem comfortable and familiar, but we aren't truly free. Just ask yourself, do you truly feel free? Ask yourself, what did you want it to be when you were a kid? Is that what you're doing right now? Or do you feel satisfied in your life, in your career, in your relationships? And I'm not saying that, you know, sometimes we will never achieve all of them. That's just the reality. There's certain barriers that life puts, and certainly systems and societies, societal, governmental, political strata that keeps us stuck. But if we can work to free ourselves, to free our spirit from our own self-created cage, then that's an incredible goal to strive towards. The second value, Filipino value, although I don't like using that term because Filipino actually means a Spanish individual who was born in the islands of the Philippines. So they weren't meant for, they called our people pintados, meaning people who were painted, tattooed. Back then people, you know, women and men felt okay to expose a lot of the bodies. They decorated themselves with tattoos. They had certain garments that came from different places that they traded with, such as silk from China, batik from Indonesia. I can only imagine how beautiful those outfits were. Okay, so tama lang means just right, right? Not too much, not too little. This kind of goes hand in hand with the Buddhist principles of the middle way. it's important to just take what we need. Take what we need in terms of resources. So, if you're going to fish, it would be wise for you to just take what you need and leave the rest for another day, because another person may need to take some fish. And if we all just took all the fish out of the ocean, then we won't have any for the future. So it's important to have this concept of tama lang, meaning just right. And when I created this program, I said, the intention is, one, to make it available to anyone who's willing, ready, and who's committed, but also to just exchange in the right way. Like, we don't need to accumulate so much. That just creates so much stress. So we have to redefine what currency is, because currency is a flow, a flow of energy. That's why it's called an energy exchange. And within that flow, in order for it to be received, in order for the flow to be received, I think it would behoove us to not stop the flow, right? This is what happens when we dam rivers. What happens when there's a flash flood? The river, the dam will break. So in order for currency to flow, we have to allow it to flow into our hands and out to our hands in the work that we do that is linked to our purpose, our highest self. So the energy exchange program acknowledges and recognizes all forms of currency, which could be a trade in knowledge or a trade in skill. And most importantly, keeping the principles of pay it forward, in terms of returning that not to me, but to a bigger, cause, to however, you, whatever life mission that you may have decided to embark in. I think it's important to return it to people, and not just people, but all sentient beings who may need your help in the future. Okay? Number 3 is this concept of bayanihan, which is just what I described. So in the Philippines, in the old small villages, when someone is moving, the entire community helps the individual move. And it's not packing boxes like we do here in the West. It's actually lifting the entire house. So bayanihan means a strong sense of community. This is throughout our culture, Anyone who you meet, you immediately call them like older brother, older sister, ate, kuya, tita, auntie. That's just embedded in our culture. It's a very communal, which is quite opposite of the individualistic culture that is encouraged here in the West. Both have their pros and cons, of course, but a strong sense of community helps fight the loneliness that is kind of like the bigger epidemic here in the West. Makatao, meaning a person who is conscientious of the other. So an example is that, in the Philippines, or Filipinos usually when they greet each other, instead of saying hello, they would ask, have you eaten yet? And if you haven't, they're always, either you've eaten or not, they're always trying to offer you some form of food. People don't make decisions just thinking about themselves. And this is quite a really big distinction here in the West when I moved here, is that people are encouraged to be individualistic. But in the Philippines, no. You're always to consider your family and your community when you make a decision, to really reflect and analyze the effects that would have. Because the family unit in the community is so strong. Which goes to the next concept, number 5, which is walang iwanan. It just means nobody gets left behind. It's very similar to the concept of ohana in Hawaii, family. Nobody gets left behind. If you've ever seen that movie Lilo and Stitch, you know, nobody gets left behind or forgotten. That's a really important concept. Kalikasan, meaning Mother Nature. As I said, the country, the islands, it's not a country because people didn't have the concept of countries. You know, there were people who lived by the shore, the Austronesians, and the Micronesians, people of darker skin and curly hair. They lived in the mountains. You know, not one owned a country or what. Even though there were kingdoms, the Majapahit Empire, and the Srivijaya Empire in Indonesia. These concepts were quite foreign in Austronesia. Yeah. Actually, the Majapahit and Srivijaya arrived with the arrival of Hinduism. So, those ideas came from India. Anyway, there is a deep sense of relationship with Mother Nature. To this day, you know, the Aita people in the mountains, they're taught, they teach their young ones that, you know, only to take what they need. So they don't cut down the entire tree, they cut down branches and they make whatever they need to make with those. Very resourceful and not wasting anything. That's quite key. And then they are nomadic, so that they rotate their areas of where they live so that they never overuse the resources. There's also a very interesting group of people called the Bajaus, who live in the south, in the Sulu Sea, and these people don't ever step foot on land except to die. So you can imagine a life in the sea, born in the sea, all your life in the sea, and only come to land to die. These people have even evolved to be able to see clear underwater. Their eyes constrict underwater, whereas most of us, our eyes would dilate, making the water image blurry. And when they collect their food, they spear fish, so they don't use nets and take more than what they need. Number 7 is tulungan. Tulungan means helping, sharing, helping one another. Like, this is just kind of like very natural if you're living in an island that's bombarded by typhoons in the monsoon season, because there's a lot of destruction and there's no time to be wasting feeling sorry for yourself. You have to help one another to rebuild. So these storms, these earthquakes, which we are exposed to because we are in the ring of fire with a lot of volcanoes. So there's a lot of calamities, but even though that's such, people are very resilient because of tulungan. We help each other. Number 8 is bahala na, or hayaan mo. So bahala comes from the word batala, which is the main deity, sky deity responsible for the creation of the world. And just leave it to batala, you know. Sometimes we can't do anything to better a situation. Sometimes it's best to just leave it be, let it go. And accept things with gratitude and trust that your needs will be provided for. Number 9 is salamat. So salam comes from the word salam alaikum from Islam, And in Indonesia and Malaysia, salamat datang means hello. But in the Philippines, salamat means thank you. And there is always a deep sense of gratitude, especially when your life can be taken away by Mother Nature very easily. Number 10 comes from the Spanish word familia, and because F is not a sound that is present in Austronesian language, P is, so familia is, as I said, the culture is very family and community oriented. This is probably the single most important word in the Philippines, which is family. I can't express in words how important family is in our culture. You know, a lot of Filipinos work outside of the Philippines, over 10 million of them. And these people would send their money back to the Philippines, to their relatives. They could easily just, enjoy it for themselves. But again, that is not within our culture. Yeah. It ties everything. Nobody gets left behind. Community. So going back to these traditional values is what really, really inspired me to create a new system for the new world that we are in terms of how I conduct my work and my business. Buddy's scratching himself. Hey, buddy. Having realized all of this, I began to reclaim the word babaylan. Babaylan is a traditional healer in the Austronesian islands of the Philippines. And this healer role is reserved for women and transgendered folks. The society is surprisingly very matriarchal. Not surprising, but it's surprising in a way because early cultures tend to be patriarchal. But in Austronesia, it's quite there's some egalitarian, very advanced for the time. And to this day, the Philippines have had, I believe, 2 female presidents. Maybe a third one. And this is my message. Ito po ang mensahe ko sa mga lahat ng mga Pilipino na nanonood. Na napaka-importante ang time na ito dahil alam natin po kung anong nangyayari sa ating bayan. Gusto ko lang po kayong ipaalala kung ano po ba ang ating mga filosofiyang Pinoy. Ano ang ating totoong mga values na katulad ng sinabi ko. At tanungin niyo po ang sarili niyo kung nasaan